Is God really playing hide and seek with his own body? Seriously, who does that and why? Let's dive into a world where time is a sun's rotation, miracles are just inconvenient, and a priest's words can conjure up a whole other Christ. It started predictably with Aristotle. He thought time wasn't real, not really. It only existed because the sun kept circling, a cosmic metronome ticking away the seconds. Imagine a world where a legal document declaring an old piece of paper money valid suddenly becomes useless because time itself decided it was over. That's Aristotle's time. A strange, almost bureaucratic concept for something so fundamental. Then came God, the ultimate creator, and the rules changed. Creating something and then sustaining it, that's a different ballgame. It's like building a Lego castle and then constantly adding bricks to keep it standing. God created X is true at the very beginning, a single decisive moment. Afterward, it's God created X and God keeps X from crumbling. It's a shift, a subtle but profound change in how we understand divine action. Enter Ockham, a medieval monk with a penchant for stripping things down to their bare essentials. He wrestled with the idea of time and he didn't like it. He argued that if God created an angel in a world without perfectly predictable movements, the statement God created the angel would be true for a fleeting moment, then false. It's a logical tightrope walk, a demonstration of how even the most powerful creator is bound by the rules of existence. He was obsessed with the idea of a starting point, a single act of creation, and everything else flowing from that. Now let's talk about the Eucharist, the central mystery of Catholic faith. It's bread and wine, right? But it's also supposedly the actual body and blood of Christ, and this is where things get complicated. The question isn't how it happens, but why it's even a question. Think about it, time is always moving, always changing. A law declaring old money valid is a temporal paradox. And God, according to this line of thought, doesn't create things and then just let them drift. He actively maintains them. It's like a sculptor who doesn't just carve a statue and leave it to the elements. He constantly reinforces it, protects it, ensures it remains. Ockham, bless his logical heart, saw this problem everywhere. He was trying to figure out how God could do something seemingly impossible, be present in multiple places at once. Imagine a single person simultaneously in London and New York. Seems impossible, right? But Ockham argued that God could pull it off, maybe by subtly altering the way space itself works. He proposed a solution called consubstantiation, where Christ's body exists alongside the bread like two coexisting realities. It's like a ghostly presence, a subtle mingling of the divine and the earthly. And then he suggested something even more radical. God could transform the bread into the body in a way that mirrors the way the divine word transforms into human nature. It's a mind-bending concept, a fusion of the sacred and the mundane. But here's the kicker, Ockham wasn't just theorizing. He was engaging in a fierce debate with his predecessors, particularly Scotus and Aquinas. They had different ideas about how God's power worked, about the nature of change. Aquinas, the big thinker, insisted that the bread's substance wouldn't be destroyed, just transformed. It's like turning lead into gold, the material remains, but its nature changes. Scotus, a brilliant but stubborn theologian, argued that Christ's body was so ethereal, so lacking in physical substance, that it couldn't be affected by the normal rules of the world. Ockham, however, was relentless. He argued that God could do anything, provided it was logically possible. He challenged the very foundations of their arguments, questioning whether the idea of annihilation was even meaningful. If something is simply reduced to nothing, is it really gone? He was obsessed with the mechanics of it all, the precise steps involved in God's miraculous transformation. He introduced a new definition of transubstantiation, a term that's become central to Catholic theology, the succession of substance to substance. It's like watching a magic trick where one thing disappears and another appears in its place. But Ockham didn't just want a description, he wanted a process. He broke down the transformation into a series of distinct events. First, the bread's substance vanishes. Then the accidents, the outward appearances, the taste, the smell remain, but they're now associated with a completely new substance, Christ's body. It's a complex choreography of divine action, a carefully orchestrated sequence of changes, and here's where it gets truly bizarre. Ockham suggested that God could even make the bread appear to exist simultaneously with Christ's body, creating the illusion of a single, unified substance. Imagine a stage magician making a rabbit disappear and reappear in a hat. The rabbit isn't really in two places at once, but it appears to be. He even went so far as to propose that God could destroy the bread's substance entirely, leaving only its material elements behind. Or he could reduce the bread to its simplest components, flour, water, yeast, while preserving those elements in the same place. It's a dizzying array of possibilities, a testament to Ockham's willingness to embrace the seemingly impossible. Now, let's talk about location. Ockham was obsessed with the idea of multiple locations. He argued that God wasn't limited by the same spatial constraints as humans. He could be present in heaven, on the altar, and in the hearts of believers all at the same time. It's like a master of illusion, able to create the impression of multiple realities. He even suggested that the priest's words, the consecration, were the trigger for this transformation. It's not just a ritual, it's an act of divine power, a command that sets the entire process in motion. The priest isn't changing the bread, he's telling God to change it. But Ockham wasn't interested in philosophical debates about the how, he was more concerned with the what. He wanted to know what God was trying to achieve, what his intentions were. And he argued that God's primary goal was to make Christ's body present on the altar, and that he chose not to make it present without Christ's soul. He introduced a concept called strict sense conversion, where the priest literally transforms the bread into Christ's body. And then he introduced broad sense conversion, where the priest brings Christ's soul and accidents along with the transformed bread. It's like a two-stage process, a carefully calibrated sequence of events. Ockham's approach was revolutionary. He challenged the traditional understanding of transubstantiation, arguing that it wasn't a single, instantaneous change, but a series of distinct events. He dismissed the idea that the bread's substance was annihilated, arguing that it simply ceased to exist as bread and became something entirely new. He was essentially saying that God wasn't just changing the bread, he was creating a new substance altogether. It's a dramatic shift in perspective, a move away from the idea of transformation towards the idea of creation. And then he dropped a bombshell. God could make the body of Christ exist under the host and at the same time make the bread substance suddenly exist elsewhere while preserving the bread accidents in their original position. It's a scenario so outlandish, so utterly defying our everyday experience that it's almost impossible to grasp. He even suggested that God could destroy the bread's substantial form, leaving only its material elements behind. Or he could reduce the bread to its simplest components, flour, water, yeast, while preserving them in the same or in a different place. It's a dizzying array of possibilities, a testament to Ockham's willingness to embrace the seemingly impossible. But here's the thing, Ockham wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply exploring the possibilities, laying out a series of logical arguments to demonstrate that God could do these things. He was a pragmatist, a realist, who believed that the most important thing was to understand the potential of God's power, not to limit it with philosophical constraints. He famously declared that multiple location is no problem for God. It's a statement that seems almost absurd, but it's rooted in a fundamental belief that God is not bound by the same rules as humans. And that brings us back to the original question, is God really playing hide and seek with his own body? Maybe. Or maybe we're just not equipped to understand the full scope of his power. Ockham's legacy is complex and controversial. Some see him as a brilliant innovator, a pioneer of modern logic. Others see him as a reckless speculator, a man who pushed the boundaries of theology too far. But one thing is certain, Ockham's ideas have had a profound impact on the way we understand the Eucharist. He forced us to confront the seemingly impossible, to question our assumptions about space, time, and the nature of God. And in the end, isn't that what theology is all about? Challenging our beliefs, pushing the boundaries of our understanding, and seeking to glimpse the divine in all its mystery and wonder. So the next time you receive communion, take a moment to consider the incredible transformation that has taken place. Remember the brilliant minds who have wrestled with this mystery, the theologians who have sought to unravel its secrets. And ask yourself, is God really playing hide and seek with his own body? Perhaps the answer is yes. And perhaps that's the most beautiful and awe-inspiring truth of all. But seriously, what if God just really likes bread?